Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Tuesday, June 15th, and we're breaking down this massive 15-game set that we have over on DraftKings today. Yes, each and every single team is playing, all 30 of them, so we have pretty much unlimited options to talk about. It's a loaded slate for the most part. I'd say more so on the offensive side rather than the pitching. There is a couple of good pitchers to talk about, but it's mainly a bat slate because there's not a whole lot of great pitching, so we have lots of options to talk through, and I'm pretty excited for it. I'm sure you guys are as well. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. You can follow me over on social media using the handles in the bottom corner of your screen. And if you want some extra content, you can help support the channel over on Patreon using the link down in the description. Got projections, optimizer, ownership, projections, rankings, cheat sheets, data sheets, Discord community, all that fun stuff. Link is down below. But I think that's it for the plug. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as per usual, we'll start with the pitchers and move on to the bats. And like I said, not a awesome pitching slate for the most part, which means there's lots of good offenses to talk about. And since we have all 30 teams on tap, yeah, there's a lot of good offenses to talk about here. But I do have a handful of solid pitchers I think do make some sense today. Maybe not in the greatest matchups in the world, but I mean, they're still solid pitchers, so you're kind of mainly just banking on the talent here. And that's kind of what we're doing with Trevor Rogers. I don't love the matchup here versus St. Louis. They got some pretty good offensive pieces that do hit left-handed pitching pretty well. But Trevor Rogers has been a guy that's been very impressive so far this season. And only a 3.8 implied team total against him, which is pretty low given the slate that we had today. 7K prop is a slight underdog, but I still think Rogers is going to be a pretty solid play here. He has a really nice 2.02 ERA this season, which is, I mean, the xFIP and Sierra is obviously going to be a little bit higher because it's such a low ERA. It's not quite Jacob deGrom, but it's still pretty darn low. But 3.3 xFIP, 3.5 Sierra, near a 30% K rate. Can walk some guys, but virtually doesn't give up any power whatsoever. The matchup versus the Cardinals are not a team that will strike out a lot versus lefties, and they actually have some pretty decent splits overall. Only 22% K rate. They will walk quite a bit, near 200 ISO, 118 WRC plus, and a 340 WOBA. So again, this is not a pretty matchup. And since there's Coors Field in the slate and they're pretty expensive and there's some other good expensive bets, I'm not sure I'm going to get the Trevor Rogers in cash games today. I feel like he's a better tournament play because I think a lot of people will end up going with a guy like Yu Darvish for $600 less, who's also a very talented pitcher facing a much worse offense. So I'd say he's a tournament option only for me, but if you're trying to get a little bit different today up top, don't hate the idea of going with Trevor Rogers, although he may cost you an expensive bat, which there's a lot of good expensive bats today, so it's just going to have to be something you weigh later on in the day. Then Yu Darvish, $9,400. I could see him ending up being pretty popular. I hate that he's in Coors Field. It's definitely a downgrade from Petco Park, and it's going to be like 100 degrees in Coors again, which it was yesterday, and the pitchers did just fine. But I mean, I was pretty surprised that Coors Field flopped that much. I'm willing to go right back to the well, though. Like, sport like baseball, a team can absolutely get shut out the day before, then they can go absolutely ballistic for 15-plus runs the next day. So you have to have a short memory there, and would not be surprised if the Padres end up doing something like that today. But Yu Darvish, you're going up against the Rockies, a pretty bad offense for the most part. Yes, they always get a nice upgrade when they are playing at home in Coors Field, but going up against Yu Darvish, a very talented pitcher, a guy that's got around a 30% K rate, doesn't really walk too many guys, doesn't give up too much power, around 100 pitches per game this year. I think he should be just fine. Yes, strikeouts typically go down when you get the Coors because of the elevation, but $9,400 with the pitching options we have in this slate, I feel pretty comfortable saying point per dollar wise, he's the best spend up pitcher on this slate. Again, with it being in Coors, we have a team total of 4.4 here for the Rockies. If this was in Petco, we're probably talking about maybe upper twos to low threes for the Rockies in their team total, but he's still a pretty heavy favorite. Would be very surprised if Darvish does not pick up a win in this on this slate. And he's also got a 7.5K prop as well, so I think he should be just fine. And again, it's scary because it's in Coors, and the weather is definitely pointing towards a good day for the offenses, but Yu Darvish is a very talented pitcher, so I'm going to side with him there. Mike Minor, $9,200, coming off a great game versus Oakland. He's a bit of a iffy pitcher. He's got a decent K rate this season, but there was always just a little bit of concern playing Mike Minor because sometimes he'd be off his game, and at $9,200, it's definitely a bit scary. I have to double check this, but it feels like this might be the most expensive he has been all season long, but I guess deservedly so, coming off a great game. Plus, he's got the best matchup you can ask for as a lefty versus the Detroit Tigers, who have been absolutely abysmal versus them so far this season. Just looking at their splits, it's kind of a joke to look at, but a 31% K rate, 109 ISO, 277 WOBA, a 77 or 75 WRC plus. Earlier in the year, when it was a bit of a smaller sample size, I think their WRC plus was like in the low 30s. It's definitely improved a little bit, but it's still pretty much some of the worst numbers in the entire league. So if you're just purely playing the matchups here, Mike Minor does make some sense, and they should be able to pick up the win as well. Can typically work deep into the pitch count for the most part. 4 xFIP, 3.8 SIERA, 27% K rate. There's one issue is power. He does give up near a 200 ISO and 1.5 homers per 9, but there's nothing to really be too worried about in that Detroit lineup. Maybe he gets into trouble with like a guy like Haas or Jonathan Scope for some power, but I think overall he should be fine. But I don't like that price point. I will say that. I'd rather pay the extra $200 for you, Darvish. But if you want to play Mike Minor today, it's perfect from a matchup standpoint, but the price does scare me a little bit. But a pretty low 4.1 implied team total against him. And then some iffy options here in Andrew Heaney at $8,100 and Luis Castillo at $8,000. Both guys do percent upside pretty much every single time they're on the mound, but they also have downside as well, especially Luis Castillo. Andrew Heaney feels a little bit safer for me, but Castillo, I mean, we'll talk about the numbers when we get there, but he is a definite wild card and a guy that's definitely been way worse than I've expected so far this year. But Andrew Heaney, $8,100 up against Oakland, who actually was the team Mike Minor just faced recently, who had an excellent game versus them as a lefty. Not saying that's going to be the case every single time a lefty faces them, but Andrew Heaney is a guy where it's tough to roster him because he can get into some trouble. He will walk some guys around 8% walk rate, which isn't terrible, but it's definitely not that great. Plus, he will give some hard contact and power. That hard contact rate's sitting at nearly 40% this season, which is definitely really high. But I like the strikeout upside, around a 29% K rate this season. Oakland's a team that's not terrible, but versus lefties so far this year, while they do present you some power, they still have around a 24% K rate, which does leave room for a little bit of upside. Plus, it's a nice pitcher's park over in Oakland. So if you're playing Andrew Heaney, it's mainly just because there's no good cheap options today, and he's got near a 30% K rate, which does make him viable because in DFS, we need those strikeouts. Plus, his numbers aren't bad. I mean, the ERA is at 4.3, but the xFIP's at 3.6, and so is the SIERA. So definitely getting just a little bit unlucky in that regard. Then Luis Castillo, $8,000. We know he's got heat in the fastball, but man, he has been a big wild card so far this year. The ERA is around 6.5 this season, which is terrible, but he is getting a little bit unlucky considering the xFIP and SIERA are around 2 runs lower. The 20% K rate's not super desirable, and the walk rate nearly being double digits is definitely concerning. Also giving up a near 300 batting average this year, 180 ISO, and a 370 WOBA. The one bright spot is not really giving up much hard contact at all, at only 21%, which is the lowest of all the pitchers we've talked about, and a 50% ground ball rate. Plus, the matchup versus Milwaukee is pretty good. They are a team that will strike out quite a bit. So far this season versus righties, they have a 26% K rate, 288 WOBA, and an 81 WRC+. So it's a good matchup. I wouldn't say it's the greatest pitching park in the world in Milwaukee, but I guess I'd say it's a very slight upgrade going from Great American Small Park to Milwaukee, but still not that great. 4.5 team total against him. It's definitely a scary spot if you want to play him, but he just recently had a decent game versus them. I want to say around 17 points. Didn't absolutely get crushed, so if you need to save a little bit of money today for your SP2, I don't hate the idea of using Castillo. I could see him picking up some ownership today, which might make him a little bit safer if you are playing cash games, but hard to say anything is safe when rostering Castillo. I think that's going to be it for the pitching, so let's move right on to the bats. And like I said earlier, this is a pretty good slate for the bats, so it's kind of hard to pick just 3 guys at each position, but we will go over them. So we'll start with the catcher position, and since it looks like we're going to have to spend up a little bit for pitchers, because I didn't see any options in like the 5 or 6 or 7K range that I absolutely loved. Yes, there's a couple of guys that are viable. Patrick Corbin might be an okay play as a lefty versus Pittsburgh, but he always concerns me. I actually think some of the righties do make some sense here, but if you want to roster him, I guess he'd be a decent cheap option today, but you got to keep in mind he is definitely a very risky pitcher, but so is a guy like Castillo and Andrew Heaney. So he's someone on the short list, but I think a Pirates righty stack might be a really solid contrarian stack if he happens to have one of those outings where Corbin just absolutely has nothing. But anyway, up top at catcher, I have some cheap options listed here. So Victor Caratini, $3,400. It's for obvious reasons, and I liked the Padres yesterday. Obviously, they absolutely flopped. That happens. It's baseball. I wouldn't put too much into it. A team can absolutely just turn it around in a day. So I am right back on the Padres train. With them flopping yesterday, people are going to fade them just because of that. I think that's even better for you. They have a 6.5 team total, which is 0.4 higher than it was yesterday, but when I recorded the video. And they have a much better matchup on the mound with Chichi Gonzalez. Austin Gomber is a solid pitcher, and he proved it yesterday. I still thought it was a bad spot for him. I didn't think he was going to have any success yesterday. It was like 100-some degrees in Coors, and it wasn't a good spot for Austin Gomber, considering there's a lot of guys in the Padres that hit left-handed pitching very well. But Chichi Gonzalez, he sucks. He is one of the worst pitchers in baseball. He had a bad start last time out, and yeah, I think the Padres absolutely bounced back in a big way here. Plus, the Rockies bullpen, xFIP-wise, they have one of the worst overall bullpen xFIPs as a team. So if they can get the Chichi Gonzalez earlier, which I assume they will, it should still be smooth sailing once they get to that bullpen. And Victor Caratini's numbers kind of sucked this year, but for a catcher at his price point on the team that he's on with a team total of 6.5, the 132 ISO and the 304 will be good enough for me. Christian Vasquez, $3,300, come against Tucker Davidson, who I don't think is a terrible pitcher, and their team total is not exciting at 4.6 really, but I was kind of finding some trouble liking any of the other catchers. Yes, there's always some expensive options like Salvador Perez or Will Smith that are always viable because they're just good overall hitting catchers, but didn't love their price points, and given the way the slate is, I can't really see myself prioritizing spending up for the catcher position, so I threw Christian Vasquez in here. Just because, the Boston bats are solid. It's a solid offense. I know sometimes they can be a bit cold, but Vasquez isn't one of the worst hitting catchers out there. The guy's decent. I know so far this season he's not been great, especially in the power department, only 101 ISO. Batting average of 260 isn't terrible for a catcher, but this is purely just a price play. It's a pretty low price point for him. And then Austin Hedges, $2,500. He sucks. A 156 batting average, 104 ISO, 27 WRC plus, like absolutely putrid numbers, but the Indians get a nice matchup versus Matt Harvey today, who is pretty much a pitcher that throws BP for the most part. Like, guys like Jay Happ, Matt Harvey, I just don't know how these guys still have jobs. I feel bad saying that because they're a human being, but man, they suck at their jobs right now. They have been absolutely terrible, and every single time Matt Harvey goes out there, he gets blown up. It seems like recently, like he had a decent start to the season where he wasn't getting killed. People were thinking Matt Harvey might be back a little bit. I was too, but since then, he has been getting killed, and I am right back on the Indians. They had a hot start yesterday. They had 3 runs in the first inning, kind of cooled off where they only had 1 extra run since that, but Austin Hedges suck, but the other Indians I think make a lot of sense. But if you want just cheap exposure to a good stack today, Austin Hedges makes some sense. Plus the Orioles bullpen's not that great either. But yeah, you can definitely pick on Matt Harvey. Looking at his splits this season, kind of curious. I don't know the overall numbers off the top of my head. But yeah, 7.4 ERA. Getting a little bit unlucky, I guess, considering the xFIP's around 5 and so is the Sierra. But he's still a guy that's given up a 200 ISO this season, 310 batting average, and looking at hard contact, he's at 31% with nearly 2 homers per 9. So, yeah, sign me up for all the Indians. I think they're all in a great spot here. Prefer lefties, but you can definitely play righties. But there's definitely a lot of good lefties in this lineup that are viable. Going down to first base, we have Eric Hosmer, $5,400. It's obvious reasons, guys. It's in Coors Field. It's going to be hot as heck, and obviously the elevation in Coors makes it a hitter's paradise. Team total above 6.5 right now. It could honestly get up to 7 as the day goes on. And Chichi Gonzalez is not a good pitcher. Looking at his numbers this season, not quite as bad as Matt Harvey's, but only a 13% K rate. Sierra's above 5, which I guess is worse than Matt Harvey's. I'm just talking ERA here, which runs 2 runs lower. But, he's just not a good pitcher. 165 ISO, giving up around 300 batting average, and good amount of hard contact as well. So you can sign me up for all those Padres. Bobby Bradley, $4,000, young guy for the Indians, recently got called up, but so far he's been hitting the ball really well. I think he drove in a run yesterday, and if you're just looking to stack the Indians up, he's going to be hitting the middle of the order, and he gets a lefty versus Matt Harvey. I think he makes all the sense in the world if you're stacking the Indians. I guess he could be a one-off in cash games as well. First base wasn't a loaded position, in my opinion, in terms of rostering guys that made sense roster construction-wise, given their salaries. So I think Bobby Bradley could end up being a pretty popular play, and for good reason. Then Phillip Evans, $2,300. You can also play him in the outfield. The cheap Pittsburgh guys were actually pretty popular last night, and I know I didn't have any of them in my videos, but once the day progressed, I was like, well, these guys make sense roster construction-wise because we're going to want to spend up for Lennon Glass now. And then we want some extra Padres guys, so how are we going to make that work? And those Pittsburgh righties I thought made some sense versus John Lester. Now you get another matchup versus lefty and Patrick Corbin, who is definitely an upgrade from John Lester, but so far this season, Patrick Corbin's definitely been hittable, so I wouldn't absolutely run away from a matchup from Patrick Corbin. I think you can use some of these cheap righties. Now, I think Patrick Corbin is viable for DFS purposes. I almost put him on the pitcher data sheet to talk about in this video, but I didn't just because I've had very, very bad luck with Patrick Corbin. I don't think I've gotten him right once this year, and even though it's the weak Pittsburgh lineup, he still concerns me. Plus, the Washington bullpen is pretty bad if they can't get the Corbin early on. So Phillip Evans for the price point, and any of these cheap Pittsburgh righties, I think are viable today. Then going to second base, we have Jake Cronenworth, $5,600. Very expensive. More expensive than Eric Hosmer. Going to be hitting near the bottom of the order, which kind of sucks. But if you're just full stacking the Padres, I wouldn't hate getting some Cronenworth exposure. But I'm only going to get to him in tournaments. Would not go there in cash games because of the price point. Cesar Hernandez, $4,900. He's pretty expensive, but the Indians do get one of the best matchups in the entire slate, probably right behind just the Padres versus Chichi Gonzalez. Unfortunately, they're not playing in like a Camden Yards, a Great American Small Park, or a Coors Field, but Cleveland's not the worst place to hit out there. And again, you're just stacking against Matt Harvey here. Cesar Hernandez is maybe not the most exciting guy to roster, to leave $5,000, but he hasn't been terrible recently, and it's mainly just to pick on Matt Harvey. Ozzie Albies, $3,900. I put him on here just because of the price point. Like, it just seems a little bit too cheap for a guy that's got a 244 ISO this season. I know his batting average is exactly great, but past couple of seasons, Ozzie's been great versus left-handed pitching. So this is purely just a price play for the most part. Then going on to third base, looking like it's going to be a spend-up position for me because the cheap guys at third base today just really weren't getting my attention. There's a lot of good spend-ups as well, and we've already mentioned some cheap options here, so I think you could definitely make third base and shortstop a spend-up position, plus there's some good cheaper outfielders to talk about as well, so I think you could definitely be able to afford a spend-up guy here. But Jose Ramirez, $6,000. He is crushing right-handed pitching this season, and I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. Jose Ramirez has always been one of the better hitters in baseball, especially since the past couple of seasons, and now that he's got a matchup versus Matt Harvey, I know he's super expensive, so maybe you're only going to get there in tournaments, but if you have the money to spend it for a guy at third base today, Jose Ramirez, pretty much near the top of the list. If Manny Machado is facing a lefty, I guess I'd say he'd be the top, but just overall, raw points-wise, Jose Ramirez is definitely an awesome option on today's slate. Manny Machado, $5,600. You're just stacking on the Padres. Don't think I have to keep repeating myself here. Get Brian Hayes, $4,600. Never feels good rostering Pittsburgh bats, but Hayes has actually been good this year. It's a smaller sample size of around the upper 30s to low 40s plate appearances. I'm not sure if that's updated yet, but he's been good so far this season. 324 batting average, 428 WOBA, ISO close to 300, and near 400 OBP. So a guy like Patrick Corbin's a guy that will struggle with some of the righties, and looking at his splits so far this season versus the right-handed bats, 45 inning sample size, he's got an ERA at 7, a 16% K rate, 315 batting average given up, 404 WOBA, and a 252 ISO with around 2.5 homers per 9. So he's been killed by righties. That's what I'm saying. It's not going to look great with their 3.5 implied team total, but the Pittsburgh righties, the price is right for them. I think they could be a decent contrarian stack today, especially if Patrick Corbin's going to gain some ownership, which I think he will, just because there's not that many great cheap pitching options. So it could be a decent way to get leverage today. Going on shortstop, Tatis, $6,400 is a massive price point, so I guess I won't say you have to play him. And I said yesterday I was going to do my very best to play Tatis, and I did, and it did not work out. He had 0 points. But again, that's baseball. Things can happen, but Chichi Gonzalez, he sucks. Coors Field, great place to hit. It's going to be hot. I mean, I'd be surprised if Tatis blanks you once again. Should be one of the best plays on the entire slate. It's just that it's a tough price tag. I'm not going to disregard that. It's where I'm going to say you have to play him because it's definitely going to be tough to fit him in. But if you can, I'd absolutely love to do that. I'm at Rosario, $3,900. He's been playing some pretty good baseball recently, even though the overall numbers this season haven't been great. But again, he's going to be hitting to the top of the order like the Indians. Team total above 5. Sack against Matt Harvey typically works out. Kevin Newman, $2,100. He went deep last night, and if he was hitting higher in the order, I'd prefer that. But $2,100, dirt cheap righty here versus Patrick Corbin. Kind of already mentioned why I like the righties here. So if you are going with the cheap Pittsburgh Pirates stack, I do like Newman. Going down the outfield, Tommy Pham, $5,400. Again, I just like all the Padres here. I have 3 Padres outfielders in a row. My favorite one here would be Trent Grisham, just because it's a lefty on righty matchup versus Chichi, plus he's the cheapest. And he also went deep last night, but these guys are all excellent plays. If I had to rank them, once you factor in their price points, I would say Grisham, Pham, and Will Myers, but you really can't go wrong with either. But I think Trent Grisham is a staple in cash games tonight. Then we have all 3 Astros outfielders. Once again, Yordan Alvarez, Cal Tucker, and Michael Brantley. All these guys are fantastic plays going up against Kyle Gibson, who's not a terrible pitcher, but Astros do have a team total close to 5 here, and I don't know why, but DraftKings hates the Astros outfielders. Like, they're underpriced every single time. Alvarez should be around 5K. Michael Brantley should probably be around 5K. Cal Tucker should be at least in the 4K range somewhere. But I don't know what it is, but DraftKings hates Michael Brantley. Like, he is. I know, like, earlier in the season, he was really cheap. And then after that, he kind of got to that 5K range, close to 6K. But that's dropped off. I don't know what it is. They don't like him, but he's just one of the best pure hitters in baseball, batting 313 this season with a decent amount of pop. And Kyle Tucker's had plenty of pop this season, 221 ISO. Yordan Alvarez got he's sitting at a 216 ISO this season with a 305 batting average. So I'm not really sure why they're this cheap, and I think they're some of the best outfield options on the entire slate. Maybe better so for tournaments. Well, I don't want to say that because I think a guy like Trent Grisham's a cash game guy, and I wouldn't say Tommy Pham and Will Myers are absolute cash plays because at their price points. Plus, Will Myers doesn't always really hit near the top of the order. If I can fit them in, I'd like to, but given the price points, you could definitely play guys like Alvarez, Tucker, and Brantley in cash games today. And Eddie Rosario, $3,800, another guy you could play in cash games. Like if you wanted a piece of each outfield here, so you go Rosario, you go Grisham, you go Brantley, that could definitely be a pretty solid way to go. But just because Rosario, I mean, I know he hasn't been great this year, but if you just want to spread out your exposure and get exposure to good stacks today, like in cash games, you don't really need to stack. You just need to get good pieces in each game or whatever you want to do. I mean, he's a lefty on righty matchup here versus Matt Harvey. And you love lefties versus Harveys, the cleanup guy. I like the Indian stack quite a bit. Wouldn't be surprised if we see a first inning home run from Eddie Rosario, but it's definitely a good place to be in the outfield today. A lot of guys that are underpriced for the most part, so shouldn't be too hard to fit them in. But with that being said, guys, that'll be it for the video. I'm recording this around 2:30 a.m., so hopefully I didn't sound too stupid throughout the video. Didn't slur my words too much. But yeah, I'll get out of here. I appreciate you guys listening. If you want to follow me over on social media, you know where to find me. Using those handles in the bottom corner of your screen. Leave a like if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. If you're just a frequent visitor and you do enjoy the content, I'll be here all season long. I do cover other sports as well. Check out the Patreon for some extra content, and that'll be it, guys. I'm going to go to bed, and I'll see you in the next one.